Hello, welcome to my channel. Today I want to show you how to use pivot tables, how to build them, how to use them, how to change them. If you're new to this channel, my name is Zalad. I've been using Excel for more than 10 years, and I've always been the office go-to guy helping others with their Excel questions. I've created this channel because I want to share this knowledge with the world, so hopefully you'll enjoy this content and find it useful. So I want to build a pivot table together, show you everything that I know. Hopefully you're going to learn from that. So to build a pivot table, you first have to have some data. And over here you see I'm creating a really simple database. So you have the date, customer, product, and quantity, and of course this could be anything. Okay, so let's just quickly build some data. So we have a customer named Bob. He bought 20 units of soda, and let's just Bob, Mary, Steve, Will. Okay, and randomly soda, bread, candy, and 50, 30, 15. Let's just have some information here. We'll just do that, drag that, and let's just change it up a bit. Soda, bread, candy, soda, bread, candy, bread, soda. Okay, and now let's just use random for this part. So rand between gives you an option to draw a number between two numbers, with absolutely random. Okay. And usually I like to give the sheet a name, like DB for database. And now I want to show you some options. So this is like a basic data. So in option number one, you can just create a table. Okay. And once we created a table, you can just click anywhere, insert, pivot table. Okay. I don't like to use tables. So what I usually do is I create the pivot table on a simple flat table, or however it's called. And I really recommend that you always select a column. When you create a pivot table. When you create a pivot table, if you don't use a table, you have to select the range. So option number one is to select the range in this way. The first row has to be the headers, okay? And because from the pivot table, we'll look at the first row that you select, and that's going to be the measures or the cubes or however you want to call that you can play with. So option number one is to select the range like this. Option number two is to really select the entire column, and a good practice is to have the headers as row number one. That makes it possible. And why does this help you? Because if you operate in this manner by selecting the columns, even if you have more rows in the future, the pivot table will take them into account. So let me show you an example. So just very quickly go to insert, pivot table. You see it asks me select a table or range, and it says a column A through D, and you can select new or existing. I usually use new. That means it creates a new worksheet, see, and you have a pivot table. This is the real beginning. And let me show you just how it looks. If you select the range, insert, pivot table, now you see it has a range, A1 through D17. And so essentially right now it's the same, but I'll show you in a few minutes when you add information, one will be refreshed and the other will not. So let's call this one range piv, and this is, let's say, column piv. Okay, so a little bit about the structure of a pivot table. You can see on the right, whenever you click somewhere in the pivot table, you have what's called a field list. Now you can close that if you want to see more of the screen, and to bring it back, you got to right click and click on show field list. Okay, and this can move. Okay, you can also move this whatchamacallit. And so you see you have the fields. Now this is why it's important that the header will be the first row, because you see this is how the pivot table identifies the data. It's also important that the header is clear to you. So don't, use headers that don't make any sense. So we have date, customer, product, and quantity. And for example, I can drag, so these are the fields, sorry. And then you have 4 options: filters, rows, columns, and values. So this is very straightforward. Rows and columns are the ones that are building you the table, and the values is what you want to show. So for example, I could put a customer in the row, or I could put the customer in the column, and I can put the quantity, which makes sense, and I can put the product over here, and now you have a matrix. But I could also put the product over here, and then for each customer you see the breakdown. Okay? Or vice versa. Or I can change the order. Now, changing the order, there are a few options. So you can drag. You can also click on this triangle, and you see you have move down, move to end, and here it's move up, move to beginning. So if you had more fields here, it would show you more options. But this is essentially how you can build this. And one more thing, or a lot more things, but actually, you can see that the table has a certain view or layout. If you want to change the layout, you go to Design, and here you have a lot of options. First of all, you can change the appearance, colors and everything. You can have the band options, which means a row with color, a row without color, and same for column. So you can change all of these. Okay, very simple, and you can make all these changes as you wish. And you can also change the report layout. So here you have a lot of options. Compact, which is this one. Outline, which looks a little bit different. You see in the compact, basically all the data is in one column. So you have no matter how many fields. Let's just show you. Even if I add the date, it's still going to remain in column A, which is an advantage because you know that the pivot table is not going to change the dimensions. If you switch to outline, then you do have a column for each field. And last one is tabular. Tabular, you actually see it flat. See the difference between the two? Okay. And in tabular, you can also see the subtotals and totals. Now, let's say you don't want to see subtotals or totals. You have these 2 options. You can choose which ones to see, on or off. Okay, do not show. Okay, there's a few options. You can change the layout, and also important, you can choose to repeat or do not repeat. And this is especially accurate for this kind of layout. You see, if I'm in a tabular, then it automatically sorry, if I want to switch between, so you can see now I can move to end or move down. So, sorry, do not repeat. So now you see that it actually does not repeat for bread or for Steve that has 3 different values. And basically, what the pivot table does is just so it's clear, it shows you that 41 is the quantity for the 3 elements. So product bread, customer Bob, date 27th of February 2021. Okay, now you can also use expand collapse. Okay, and now you see it collapsed the line for Steve and summed up the 3 together. You could do that for the entire field. So everything would be collapsed, and also for this one. The value would be similar to the subtotals. It's basically the same. So you can also right click on the field and click on subtotal. And now you do see a subtotal. Okay, that's similar to show this does it for everyone. If you just want for a certain field, that's how you can do it. So this is let's say how you build a pivot table, the basics. And now I want to show you, for example, what happens if you add, let's just do the same over here, sorry. So we have, how do we build it? We have product, customer, and date, and quantity. Okay, and let's just add, the totals. So 367, and over here, you know what, just to show you the difference, just for products, so it's the same number. But now let's assume we added a value. Let's just add another, let's add a new item, I don't know, fruit or apple. Okay, we added an apple. Now in order to refresh a pivot table, there's 2 options. You can right click on refresh, or you can go over here to data and refresh all. Refresh all will update all of the pivot tables. Let's go ahead and do that. Now here you see it's still at 367, and you don't see an apple as one of the fruits because the range of the pivot table was stopped at line 17. Whereas here you do see the new value. That doesn't mean that you can't change the pivot table dimensions. You want to change the dimensions, click on the pivot table once, go here to pivot table, analyze. You have change data source. Change data source. I can just erase the 17, click on 18, and there you go. So this is how you can change your pivot table or change the data. Okay. What's so nice about pivot tables is you can really change what you are summarizing or analyzing. So the default is always sum of quantity whenever there's a numeric value. But if you go here, right click on whatever it is whatever fields you have, click on value field settings, and you see that you have a lot of options: sum, count, average, max, min, product. Let's take average now for an example. So this doesn't mean anything because the pivot table is very detailed. Basically, it looks at all the different information. But let's take out the date. By the way, in order to take out fields, you see I can just drag it, click on until it's out of the field list, or I can just go over here and uncheck it. Now, for the non-integer numbers, you can see there are more than one values. By the way, you can change that to count, and now you see how many times the combination appears. So Bob bought bread 1 time, Steve 3 times, Bob bought candy 2. So Bob's been shopping. All right, let's go back to the average. I can also change the format, just like any other cell in Excel. I can do, something like that. That's going to change the format. Also nice that you need to be aware of. So you have all these options, okay? You can examine and play with them. The most common are, the first ones, sum, count, average, but of course you can do whatever you want. You also have this option, which is very, very, very nice. Show values as. So the default is no calculation, but you can see that you can start having like percentages, running total, a lot of different options. So if I take percentage of, let's say, grand total, so now you can see that 180 doesn't make sense. This is why I need to play with it. Let's take percentage of column total. No, wrong again. Okay, I think it's because I'm using average, which doesn't really make sense. Let's switch back. Okay, so if I switch back to quantity, now you actually see that, so the quantity that Steve bought bread is 20% of the entire volume that I have over here. And of course, I can add like a subtotal, and now you see also the bread itself. So bread is 37% of everything. Okay, and actually you can even show values as parent row total. And now you see this is 100% how bread is split between the different customers. So these are a lot of nice options that sometimes you would probably manually do them, and you can actually quite easily make those changes and adjustments. So you really have a lot of options here, and you can play with this. And if you want, I can really have a session just on this. But let's leave it at this point as something a little bit more basic. So these are the options. Actually change the name of the column. So it says here sum of quantity. I can call it quantity. I can't call it quantity because that's the field name. So it gives you an error. But a nice trick I usually do is I click space bar and then quantity if I want to keep the name, or you can just, quantity per quantity, I don't know, and let's say units. So you can change all of these. You can change these. Okay, so you can, but this, I would not recommend this because this is your true data, and you can change the values. That's the only thing you can change. So another important thing that you may need to understand is that the pivot table itself has a name. You see, I clicked on the pivot table, went to pivot table analyze, went to pivot table, and it has a name, and you can name it, whatever you want, test 1. Okay, so this is helpful more for coding and things like that, but you can also use that to understand the pivot tables. And also, okay, another nice feature that the pivot table has, I want to show you, is grouping. So now you see just quantity per date. If you right click on that field, you have a group option, not like the expand, group. And whenever there's a date, it gives you these options. So for example, and if you click once, it selects. So I want to see the quantity by month and year. So now, even though the data is by a specific date, I have a summary by month and year. Right click again, click group. Now let's say I want to see quarters. Okay. Just months. So whatever you want to do, you can do that. Now you can group dates, and you can also group numbers. So if you want to build a histogram, that's also possible. And if you want, I'll make a video just on that because it's a little bit more, I'd say complicated, but it takes a little bit longer to explain. No, or it's good for you to know that whenever you create a pivot table, and one more thing, if you want to delete a pivot table, you have to mark. There's two options. You can select an empty cell, copy paste. There, it's done. Or you can just flag it and delete. This won't help. If you want to delete this column, you can't. You either have to get rid of all of it or none of it at all. Now, just quickly, I want to show you when you create a pivot table and the value is a number, it automatically gives you a sum, which is good. But what happens if now I have test here as a value? Let me just delete that one. Let's see what happens when I take the quantity. Still has some. Okay, we'll take it off in the editing, so to speak. Okay, I think one more thing or two more things I want to show you. I want to show you you can also copy pivot tables. So I'm selecting this pivot table and I'm copying it. So now we have two pivot tables. Both are connected to the same database, built the same. Now I want to show you something interesting. You cannot overlap pivots. What does that mean? It means that if for example, I take ungroup, Excel was unable to update a pivot table named test1 because it would overlap. You see, it doesn't allow me to expand because then it would overlap on an existing pivot table. That's very important when you build pivot tables. Make sure that they don't overlap, otherwise you would get this message whenever you even refresh. So imagine, let's say, not something like this, but imagine that you'd have this way, and you have another pivot table, which is different. I don't know, just by years. And now the range you added a few months. Okay. So now it doesn't let me refresh the pivot table. Okay, because May and June they don't have any room. Another nice thing that you need to be aware of and use, because it's very helpful, is called slicers. If you select a pivot table, go to Pivot Table, Analyze, Insert Slicer. Slicer is just like a filter. You can select every table here. For example, product. And let me just take this one out. And now it just filters even if the field does not exist. Okay, so this is a very good tool if you want to see just the sales for Apple or bread or what did Bob buy very quickly, very easily. You can just do that. Now what's nice about slicers is that you can actually connect them to more than one pivot table. Now if you copy the pivot table, it automatically connects to the slicer. But now I'm going to create another pivot table. Now I'm using exist, and let's put it over here. Okay, and this would be customer and quantity. Well, you know what? Let me just show you another thing. If you want to add a column, and if you don't use a table, I always recommend that you add a column before the last one. For example, I'm clicking insert and I'm going to have cost. So 543, and let's just do it this way. For some reason, I am okay. Why is it important to do it this way? I'll show you. Now, if I refresh the pivot table for all of them, here I will see the cost. See, I don't need to change anything. But if I add another column here, I don't know, sales rep, David, just say it's David, here it's Goliath. David and Goliath, that's right. Now, if I refresh everything, I will not see. I would have to change the pivot table. Once you change the dimensions, the slicers are going to disappear for you, because basically you have to redo. So now what's nice is that you can right click on a slicer and there's an option called report connections. Report connections, now you see it only gives you one option.